Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to THC Live. It is episode 3. I'm Shane Foxman.
I'm Nikita Graham, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us. It is a scorching hot day on the West Coast as we come to you from our secluded THC studios in the Lower Mainland. We have another jam-packed show coming up for you today. This guy, our first guest, is going to blow your mind. Former drug smuggler, drug counselor, author, TV producer Brian O'Day will join us live via Skype coming up in just a few minutes.
We also have Dean Davison from Davison Law Group, and he's going to be explaining us the legal limbo that us Canadians are going through right now and try to bring some light to...
It is confusing to say the least. You know, it's illegal, but not really. It's hard to get a handle on things. Hopefully, Dean will be able to explain it to us. Also, we'll hear from the provincial government. Mike Farnworth and the provincial government want to hear from you in BC. Anyway, get your thoughts on what you think about the upcoming legalization of marijuana. How do you want to see it work in BC? We'll hear from the provincial government as well. But first, maybe a little bit of a history lesson. We're
going to go to our weekly segment called Growing Pains.
Anslinger and Sharman. Their names sound like they belong on a prestigious law firm.
Edwin Poole. Denny Crane. Name on the door. Mine too.
But when it comes to prohibition, Colonel Charles Sharman and Harry Anslinger may be the two most influential figures of the 20th century. Appointed chief of the Canadian Narcotic Division in 1927, Colonel Charles Sharman will oversee the creation of a massive anti-drug bureaucracy over the next 20 years. In 1930, Harry Anslinger is appointed head of the newly created Federal Bureau of Narcotics by his uncle, Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, owner of Mellon Bank.
The Treasury Department intends to pursue a relentless warfare against the despicable, dope-peddling vulture who preys on the weakness of his fellow man.
Despite opposition from the American Medical Association, Anslinger gets the Marijuana Tax Act passed in 1937. The law is little more than prohibition, masquerading as a tax. Registered cannabis handlers must now pay $1 an ounce. Unregistered handlers, $100 an ounce. That's $1,700 in today's money. Thank you, Federal Reserve. In New York, the presiding psychiatrist at Bellevue Hospital concludes marijuana lacks the addictive qualities of opium and other drugs.
And I'm calling Bellevue because you're nuts!
At the request of Mayor LaGuardia, the New York Academy of Medicine conducts a 5-year study which finds that of more than 16,000 criminal offenders, just 67 are marijuana users, and only 6 of them committed violent acts. The Academy concludes marijuana does not lead to addiction, does not lead to harder drug use, and does not cause juvenile crime or delinquency. Anslinger is steamed. He blasts the report and announces that anyone who carries out marijuana research without Bureau of Narcotics approval will be arrested and tried on federal charges. Seriously?
You're beginning to get on my nerves.
In 1946, Colonel Sharman becomes the first chairman of the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs. He ensures nations are represented by law enforcement rather than public health officials. Together, Sharman and Anslinger push UN treaties to criminalize cultivation and use of cannabis everywhere on Earth. They work so closely they are described by some as soulmates. In the 1950s, Anslinger claims that 50% of young addicts start out smoking marijuana. The gateway theory is born. So why is Harry Anslinger's connection to Andrew Mellon and his banking clients so important? We'll give you 60,000 reasons next week on Growing Pains.
Growing Pains will bring you a new segment each week. See, I find it very educational.
I love them. I think it's pretty cool to see the history and how it all kind of came about.
Exactly. You know that it's been going on for 100 years plus in this country. As promised off the top of the show, we're very fortunate to have our next guest, Brian O'Day, a former international drug smuggler, a drug counselor, a TV producer, author of the book High, a smuggler's, I guess, confessions or the inside story. There we see it, Confessions of a Pot Smuggler. Brian O'Day joins us via Skype. Brian, thanks very much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to see you guys.
Hey. So
Hi.
The first question out of the gate is, how does a kid from Newfoundland end up becoming an international drug smuggler?
And I don't think the show is long enough. it was never intended to be. It was never a plan. I started smuggling accidentally. It was, I started smoking dope. I liked it. I needed to afford it, so I sold it to afford it. And, it was all very innocent. And somehow I just kept in the business, and the business kept growing before me. Everywhere I showed up, it got bigger.
Was it an easy business as far as things starting to grow? Like, I don't know if that was your plan originally, like you just wanted to pay for pot for yourself. How easily did it grow?
Well, it was kind of like this. When we first started to use pot and drugs in Newfoundland, we had to get them somewhere else. So we went to Toronto. And in Toronto, we got treated like, in those days, Newfoundlanders weren't treated with a lot of respect frequently. And here come the Newfies, and we got charged more. And I got turned on to a connection over in England. And so I was able to buy it at less than a fifth of the price I could get it in Toronto. And I ended up being able to bring it in and sell it to them. And so in increments, it got bigger. Was it easy? It was fun, and as long as you didn't think, that was the whole key about being in that business, was not thinking about it. You get. I'll tell you a brief little story. You get confronted with a situation, and you know instantly whether to do it or not do it. At least that's my experience. And so a friend of mine was asking me one time. It was on the third day of a coke run, no sleep, and we were in a friend's kitchen, and she said to me, "How is it you've never gotten busted?" And I said, "Because I don't think about what I do." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I get confronted with a situation, and instantly I know whether to go or not go with it, whether to do it or not do it. And as long as I follow that first knowing, I'm cool." And on the table was the complete works of Shakespeare. I flipped it open, and this is what I read. "That it is known is well enough. What grows more known grows worse to smother it." And it was Pericles, Act 1, Scene 1. And so pretty bizarre that I would encounter that, but that was basically it. And so I just, I kept following the money, I guess, not knowing that was what I was doing. But the business kept getting bigger somehow.
Were you ever worried that it was actually going to catch up with you? And did you think about that at the time of what could happen?
No.
You were just living in the moment of it all.
Always, one always knows the potential of the other side of the coin. You know it. So you don't dwell on it. If you dwell on it, you don't stay in the business, or you get broken quickly. That's a big interference in that world.
You mentioned...
It's a price we're willing to pay, right?
Yeah, no, obviously. And look, we all have our preconceived ideas, whether it's movies or television, of how glamorous that lifestyle would be until you get caught. Did the stereotypes fit? What was it like when you were at the peak of your business empire?
Oh, we were having a great time. What can I say? We had, the money wasn't an object. Going anywhere, staying anywhere, doing anything, it wasn't an object. And so we had a lot of fun, and we had a lot of fun doing it. We had a lot of fun with no money. There you go. There's a great story about that bird, by the way.
I was going to ask you about it. That was during your pirate days?
Yeah, okay. You'll get it. There's my friend Carol Frank. What a wonderful person. I was counting money there to pay the crew on our last load. In my hand was money, and that was a joint.
So you as you said, as you're sitting around that kitchen table talking about, when your friend says, "How is it that you haven't got caught?" What I find interesting was you got out of the business, and then you got caught. Is that how it played out?
Yeah. So basically, the last deal we did was we made a 75-ton purchase over in Vietnam. And we split that into 2 loads. We brought it in 2 loads. So we brought the first load in, and we had a deal in our organization. No one did coke. And one of the guys wouldn't stop doing coke, so we got rid of him, told him to disappear, and he'd get paid. And he disappeared. He came back looking for money when we were halfway through it. We gave him a little bit of money. It didn't satisfy him. He went to the DEA, told them what we were doing, and they followed us for the next year. We didn't know it. However, we were able to discover, it's a long story, but if you want to know it, you can buy my book. We were able to discover the day before we were going to bring the load down from Alaska into Washington and then put it in our trucks and send it off to California and then from there to the U.S. The day before we brought it down, we were able to find out that they were on to us and they were actually following us. So, we quickly organized a ruse because basically now we knew that they knew, but they didn't know that we knew they knew. So we were able to pull it off, orchestrating them to go look at something while they, when we knew they were looking at what we wanted them to look at, we came into another port, broad daylight basically, and offloaded the trucks in 5 hours downtown Bellingham, and because they were looking elsewhere. And so finally, when we got the load down into California, we brought our boats that they were looking at down across the border from Alaska down the Inside Passage and across the Canadian border into the U.S. They hit us, 100 of them basically, helicopters and seaplanes and DEA and FBI and every acronym police agency. And there was fresh coffee and donuts on the boat. They flipped. And,
Nice welcome for you.
Yeah, I ended up with too much money, not enough brains, and had a coke overdose. So I got sober and I went to work at a drug and alcohol hospital after that. And that's when the cops showed up, when I was working I was the head of volunteers and I was doing a couple of groups there. And they showed up at my house one day and they came in and the one cop said to me, we know what you do, O'Day. You work with dopes and drunks. This ain't about change or rehabilitation. This is about your life, motherfucker. Now do the right thing. And I said, I'd like to call my lawyer. And they said, don't call him because we're going to get him next. So there you go.
Did you think, though, once you cleaned up after the drug overdose and you're working in rehab, did you think you were home free at that point?
No, I never thought I was home free. You know what?
Oh, I'm losing a little technical problem there.
We are. We're stuck. I see me stuck.
There we go.
You're back.
Oh, yeah, you're back.
Okay. So who am I? I'm a nobody, and I'm sorry. Bring me back to that question.
My question was, I just was wondering that when you started working with addicts in rehab, did you think you were home free at that point? Did you think, okay, the cops aren't looking for me anymore?
Okay. So no. In answer to your question, I'm such a little picture, and the entire U.S. federal government was against us, and that you can't throw egg on that face and walk away from it. So I always, though my life was amazing once I got sober, I always was living with this potential hammer hanging over my head here. I knew eventually it was going to fall.
So when you actually were convicted and sent to jail, you spent, I believe, a 10-year period, a sentence there?
I was sentenced to 10 years.
And so in there, is that when you started, I believe you started writing a book while you were in jail?
That book that you flashed on the screen earlier, I wrote that in prison in Terminal Island in Los Angeles. I actually wrote over 2,000 pages in there, and it took me a long time to cull the pages and get it down to its reasonable form.
One of the most interesting things about you, not that there's not an endless list, was we came across this ad in a newspaper that you had placed, and we'll put it up on the screen for folks to see, when you were looking for a job, and I'm assuming this is after you got out of jail, and the headline is, as people can see, former marijuana smuggler. And there it is, as part of your resume, co-owned and participated in the executive level management, 120 people worldwide, excess of 100 million annually. What was the mind thought going into putting that ad out there?
All right, so this was in March, April 2001. And I had been playing the market, and I wasn't making any money, and I was losing money. And one day I was sitting at the dining room table, and my wife said to me, "Why don't you get a job?" And I said, "Get a job? Well, who's going to hire me? Like, what can I do? I never had a job in my life." And she said, "Oh, let's see. You had 110 people working with you around the world in secret and did $250 million worth of business using trains, boats, planes, every mode of transportation, and you don't know how to do anything. So why don't you just sit right down there and write a resume?" So I said, I humored her and said, "Sure, okay, I'll do that." So I sat down, and there's one thing I want to get at before we go. So after the story, let me get at it.
Sure.
So I sat down and I wrote what eventually became that ad, and I wrote it, and I wrote the attributes that I thought I had in that business that I could transfer into the mundane world. And it occurred to me as I was reading it that, I'm not going down to the Bank of Montreal and getting a job with that resume. But what I could do is put an ad in the newspaper, and I bet that it gets some attention. So that's what I did. I tried to put it in the Globe and Mail. So then I went to the National Post, and the National Post said, "Okay, we'll run it." And so I was going to run it on page 3, in the middle of the page, one time only, $1,300. And they said to me, "Listen, put this in the classified ads in the financial section for a week for the same money. Listen, you could put this as the last thing in that newspaper. I guarantee you it's going to get read."
Oh, probably go viral, yeah.
I got 600 responses by mail with postage stamps sent to the National Post from all over the world. So it was pretty fun.
It's crazy. We're asking for questions from the folks that are watching at home, but I want to give you a chance to, before we get to that, you said you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I want to show you yesterday's paper. Okay. See that? See that right there?
Yep.
Let me go there. Let me go.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay, and you see that guy?
Yep.
All right. Ralph Susar, a former deputy RCMP commissioner who served on the government's task force on cannabis legalization and regulation, is now president and CEO of Alethea, a cannabis health therapy company. Bite me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay, this guy still has beers and hangs out with guys who are still sending people to prison for that substance that this guy is now getting a 6-figure salary for, and God knows what other accoutrement.
You know what? I was wondering when you were going to come on the show, just about here you were, you went to jail for dealing with marijuana. You've had so many different incidents, and now all of a sudden it's going to be legal, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, but I'm getting a sense I can pick up on some of that.
Bernie Eves, former premier of Ontario, head of the biggest pop company in Jamaica. The former chief of police of Toronto, the head of the whole thing. It was his file. I mean, listen, shoot me, put me in prison, lock me up, give me criminal records, take everything I own, take my business and give it to those guys who put me there.
A little hypocritical, I guess.
I'm going to lead into one of the questions that we do have from an audience, a viewer right now, and their question is about your jail stay and how was your experience while you were in jail?
Awesome.
Awesome?
Yeah.
That's not maybe the word of any of us expected you to say.
Oh, man. You know what? Listen, did you ever see Con Air, the movie Con Air?
Yes.
All right, so I got to live through Con Air myself and experience it as I was living in the movie, knowing I was getting out of it. It was just such a tremendous experience. I got to spend 6 weeks on that airline going from Los Angeles to New York, flying from prison to prison, being dropped off overnight, picked up the next morning, and the whole procedure was so cinematic. And it was extraordinary to experience it knowing that I was getting out of this thing. At Terminal Island, it was built for 460 and there were 1,300 of us in there. And it was kind of close quarters, but I got to tell you what, it was the federal people run their prisons like the military. Everything is yes sir, no sir, and they'll lock you up quicker than stink, and they'll ship you. If you do anything that bugs them, they'll put you on what they call diesel therapy. They'll ship you from prison to prison. They got dozens of them. So, and they don't care about shipping you. They don't care what it costs them. And the state prisons, on the other hand, are run by prisoners because there's so many prisoners in those prisons. But on the federal level, it's different. So there was great accommodation with all of the people who lived in there. I mean, you're bumping shoulders all day long. My first accommodations there was in a place called the Freeway, which was an aisle, a hallway outside a row of cells. And those cells were all occupied as well. And the bathroom for this entire row of bunks, and there were 15, 16 bunks, 32 people, the bathroom was one of those cells was emptied. So, my picture seems frozen. There we are, we're back again. So it was, but you know, interestingly, they busted all of the Southeast Asian smugglers at the same time, pretty much. All of us had kind of similar contacts over there. There were half a dozen guys in Southeast Asia that were American or British or Australian that you could go do a deal through. And then most of it went through a guy named Tony the Thai, who was a Thai senator. And most of the pot came out of Vietnam. They locked all of us up at the same time. So when I got to prison, you know, I found my crew. And
You had a bunch of friends already.
Oh, Brian, we could talk to you all day. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Listen, we appreciate all the time you gave us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. And sometime call me back and let's talk politics.
Oh, absolutely, Brian. We'll take you up on that for sure. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Brian O'Day, a former smuggler, author, the book called High, TV producer. We will get him back on.
Yeah.
We will get him back on the show again to talk about some
sure.
other things. In the meantime, we want to throw to a new segment we have on THC Live. You know what? You might want to join it. It's the book club.
Yeah.
Brian was absolutely fascinating.
I would love to sit and chat with him all day. It would be very interesting to hear the stories of his life.
Prison was awesome. That was the
That's a very
adjective he used.
rare-
I never would have thought that's the adjective he would have used, but he used the word
rare.
awesome. Oh, he knew lots of folks.
Yeah,
It
when
was
you
all
have friends,
good.
I guess it's not too bad.
As we've been talking about, legalization in Canada, of course, is coming July 2018 is the latest date. That sounds like things will be in place before then. Lots of work to be done. And as we talked to the MP last week, we found out that there's going to be maybe different rules in each province, kind of like the liquor laws in each province. There might be different pot rules in each province. The province of BC, they want to hear from you. They want input as far as how the regulation should be put forward here in British Columbia. So here we have a chance to hear from Mike Farnworth, the Solicitor General of BC.
Hi, I'm Mike Farnworth, Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General. Federal legalization of non-medical cannabis is coming next year. In preparation, the province and other levels of governments are working on how they'll regulate the product once the Government of Canada makes it legal. We're focusing on protecting young people, making health and safety a priority, keeping criminals out of cannabis production, and keeping our roads safe. But we don't have a lot of precedents to base our approach on. Canada is only the second nation to legalize cannabis in this way. That's where you come in. On this website, you'll find information about the national changes ahead and a way to provide feedback as we develop BC's provincial and local frameworks. For example, how old should you be to use cannabis? Where should people be able to buy it? How do we prevent drug-affected driving? These are just a few of the questions I hope you'll consider as you share your thoughts. And please keep in mind, the public engagement process ends November 1st. And thank you for helping us to maximize public safety and health as Canada legalizes cannabis.
BC Solicitor General Mike Farnworth. One of the things he talked about was, safe driving and roadside tests, and that's something I keep hearing over and over again. How will they test? How will they know?
It's going to be interesting to find out. There's tons of things out there and speculations on, are they going to stick with the same kind of alcohol tests that they're using right now? I know in the States they are doing some of that. So are they going to continue with that, or will there be breathalyzers? And
I've heard about strips that they can put on your tongue that measure something in your saliva. I've heard they use that in Australia. And I also know that here they have if you get pulled over at one of the things, what do they call them? The spot checks, the ride program where they pull you over. They have drug recognition officers that look at you, talk to you, and decide if you're driving impaired. And I'm not sure how that
it's going to be very interesting. They must be very skilled.
Well, I don't know. There's only one of you, and there's 4 Big Macs. So is that a clue? Does that automatically make it? So they go, no, you got to pull over. It's interesting to say the least. If you want to have your input, and you want to let the provincial government know what you think, we're going to put the website up on the screen for you. There you see engage.gov.bc.ca/BC Cannabis Regulation. I'm sure there's all kinds of prompts that can take you through once you go to the website.
Well, we're going to welcome here Dean Davison. He is from Davison Law Group. And we're really excited to have you here to ask some of the questions of what's coming up.
Explain some of the legal limbo we're living in. You represent some dispensary owners.
Yes,
how difficult of a time is it right now? How gray of an area is it right now? Because while it's still illegal, anyone who's driven around the Lower Mainland or Ontario, anywhere in the country, sees dispensaries everywhere.
It's a very interesting time. The federal government's given kind of an overview of what they see and how they see it going, and the provincial governments will implement that as time goes on. But in the interim, some municipal governments, Vancouver's a good example, have decided to kind of allow dispensaries under a regime. And they've kind of done that on their own accord, because it's still legally illegal. So it's a very interesting, exciting time in law. Very interesting time.
So we hear stories about dispensaries being raided. When if a client of yours calls you and goes, hey, my dispensary was just raided, what happens? What is that situation like?
Well, I deal a lot with municipal government, and I deal a lot with the civil side. I don't do too much with the criminal side exactly, but that does happen, and I'm the first one usually gets a call. We try and treat it as if it was any type of situation dealing with the police or criminal. The truth of the matter is, it really isn't. Effectively, when they go through the process, it seems that most of them either getting the charges dropped or it's being stayed and on hold. It seems what is happening is municipalities are using police, I would suggest, to maybe intimidate dispensaries to go away.
So, and that's interesting because as we just heard from our guest, Brian O'Day was mad because he's got, former, law and order people who work for the government are now like CEOs and working for, growers and different organizations and using the police almost to get rid of the competition.
Yeah.
It's a bizarre time we're living in right now.
It is. Toronto was very aggressive with that, and something was even more unique is they did some raids there, but then they actually asked the Vancouver police to do some equivalent raids, which trafficking is kind of trafficking, so it's not hidden that the dispensaries are selling medical marijuana or marijuana, which would be, under the laws, trafficking. So it was funny that the one province/city that was very, very aggressive is the same one that seems to be now saying we're going to do it ourselves. It just seems like they were using the police for maybe intimidation or bullying, as you said, to kind of move the competition on, which is unusual.
Yeah, no, to say the least.
It's going to be an interesting time to see.
Now, you mentioned that, this wasn't your specialty.
No.
Until not too long ago. When that first person, that first client approached you about getting involved in this fight, were you apprehensive? Did you think, you know what, I don't need to be involved in this? Or did you look at it going, you know what, this is, forget the issue, it's from the legal standpoint, it's fascinating.
Right. I was a little apprehensive. I recently had done the hookah in the city of Vancouver fight, which is along the same terms in some ways, just the cities or the government was being too aggressive, wasn't necessarily interpret the law the way that my client or I thought was fair. And I saw that there was, they needed some assistance, I think, the dispensaries. But from back then to now, what I've learned about the area, what I've learned about the people that use dispensaries, and what I've learned about that it's, if you think of it as a medicine, and you think about it as something that's, if governments are here for decreasing harm reduction or, decreasing harm for their constituents, there's not a lot of evidence that people using dispensaries are getting into any type of trouble, there's any crime related to it. There's very little actual evidence that dispensaries and people using marijuana are something that needs to be corrected, as opposed to maybe drinking and driving or that other things, or the people that maybe the criminal element that might be involved with selling marijuana not in dispensaries. That seems to be a real thing.
Now, do you think the dispensaries are going to be shut down in Vancouver and we're going to have different stores opening up?
It's a very weird time because the federal government has said, this is the regime top level. Provinces, you can do what you want. And then provinces haven't really stepped in. We've heard a bit from our premier, but he hasn't really committed to it. But the city of Vancouver committed last year to already saying, we're going to let these dispensaries stay open. So to Vancouver's credit, I think they're being proactive. In theory, the province could say tomorrow, you're not doing that, but my sense is that they will be allowed to stay open.
Vancouver's been fairly lenient as well compared to some of the other provinces across Canada.
Right. They're really working with the dispensary system. I think they're really trying to make that work. They recognize the expertise. They recognize that people maybe want to go in and be able to talk to somebody. So to their credit, and I've had my battles with the city of Vancouver, to their credit, I think they're taking the right approach. It just has to be fine-tuned maybe a little bit.
Now, as you've kind of alluded to, you've educated yourself just by going through the process of what it's like. When you're discussing the situation with folks on the other side, whether it be city officials, whether it be law enforcement, and again, you deal more with civil issues.
Right.
But are you still going up against, as you're talking to people, and I don't mean using the word ignorance in a derogatory sense, but in the true sense that the people that are making decisions don't know enough about what's going on?
Yes, and in fact, I've been in front of many city councils, and I say to them, look for evidence that this should be shut down. Give a reason, something. And a lot of times the response is, look, it's illegal, we don't care, we're just going to shut it down. And that can be very frustrating, I think, but that's usually what happens. And I try to explain them and show them some evidence that, it is a medicine, and there's people 50, 60 years old that have never done medical marijuana or any marijuana, and they find there's real value, harm reduction value. There's some symptoms that go away. And these people, I think it'll be more difficult for them. In fact, they've sworn in testimony that it'll be difficult for them to get this if the dispensaries are closed in their neighborhood.
Right.
Where would you go, right? It's kind of that question.
Well, you're denying people, when it gets to that point, again, it's pain and suffering it almost becomes to that point.
Yeah.
Tell the folks how they can ask Dean a question.
Well, we can go online right now. Below, there's a comment bar, and you can go down there and you can type in your questions. We're going to open it up to them in a few minutes here. Get some questions down there for them.
If you're looking into a crystal ball, I know they're saying July 2018 now is the date, and we keep hearing how that's the date, but really that's not even written in stone. It'll evolve, things will change.
Yes.
If you could look into a crystal ball, if we're sitting down next year at this time and we're doing episode 48 of THC Live, what are you going to tell us? What do you think? Where do you think we're going to be?
Well, I think that these types of shows and reaching out to people and encouraging them to get involved is very key. So we're kind of in this weird, potentially pre-prohibition or end of prohibition period where the people, I think, especially the community in the marijuana community, are very active, and they should continue to do that. That, I think, can change things because politicians ultimately want to get elected. And if they hear things from people, that can change things. Now, that being said, I think that there's going to be some cases that are going to have to go through the courts. The judge is going to have to look at it with some evidence in front of them and say, this is what I think that means. This is what is right. Because we still have a charter and a constitution, and governments can pass laws that don't pass muster in the end.
No, and sometimes when the laws pass, they intentionally leave a lot of gray area. Because then they do leave it up for interpretation,
Yes.
and then that does open up another kind of can of worms.
Right, right. And the Cannabis Act has some areas that are very wide open. It has some very specific. It seems like on the enforcement side, it's very specific, very aggressive, I would suggest. But on the interpretation, it does seem like they're leaving it up to the provinces a bit more. But I think that it's going to be an interesting time because I think judges are going to get a bit more educated and just see more people and realize that it's not necessarily a fun type of culture. It's actually, again, I'll say it again, it's more of a medicine type based. At least that's my experience.
Do you think that because we're making cannabis legal in Canada, do you think it's going to open the door for other drugs to become legal?
I think it's certainly possible because I think that there's this attitude that because marijuana is going to be legal, the sky is going to fall. But we've seen in other states, in fact, which is, if anybody would have had a difficult part, you think the United States have, they've opened it up, and it seems like it's no big deal. I've driven through Washington, and every once in a while you say, oh, that's a dispensary. That's kind of weird because it's not crowded around. There's not smoke coming out of the top of it. It's a normal everyday building. So I think that I hope by people seeing that legalizing marijuana didn't really matter that much. It was a good thing that maybe it could be a kind of an opportunity to go one step further.
And what about smoking indoors? I'm wondering do you know any of what's going to happen with that, where you can legally smoke it, you can be out on the street, we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
Seattle, you can walk down the street.
Walk down the street.
People are smoking it. Can we do that here, you think?
Yeah, I think the issue is going to be secondhand smoke. I've got a bit of background in that area as well. I've thought, the hookah thing was kind of naturally like that. And I think the question is going to be, because I know that they're pushing more for example, you might have heard it in condos, you can't smoke in your own condominium at some point.
And what if you have kids too?
Yeah.
You don't want to be smoking at home with your family there.
My personal thoughts is the government's overreaching. However, I appreciate that secondhand smoke has some things in it that, are probably not good for you. I think we have edibles on the way coming, and that gives, if I have that now here, you're not affected by that. Whereas if I smoke, you are. Yeah. So I think that my sense of what I've seen from the courts is, you have an alternative, i.e. oils or edibles or whatever, therefore you really don't need to smoke. So I don't see that the smoking is going to be, I don't think it's going to be increased anywhere you can smoke. You can't smoke cigarettes, you probably can't smoke cannabis.
Let me ask you this. What about the folks that are in jail for marijuana right now? What happens to them? All of a sudden it's legal, you got someone who's got a record, you've got someone who's in jail. Is there any talk at all? Have you heard any talk about that?
Well, I have. I also think, though, that I can appreciate maybe the federal government doesn't want to say, hey, we're not going to do anything, because they want that potential threat for people right now. And if they say, when we put this on, don't worry about it.
Oh, so go and knock yourself out right now.
Yeah, go do whatever you want.
Right.
I don't think they can do that, but I would hope that they would. Common sense, because it is very serious to have a criminal record. And for something, 1 month it's a problem and another month it's not, I think is wrong. But I don't make those decisions. So.
Well, no, it's already confusing enough that there'll be different rules in different provinces.
Yeah.
But again, I get it. We've already done that with alcohol. I remember moving to Saskatchewan when I first moved there, and the bar was closing, and the guys walked around back to buy off sale to leave. And I go, what do you mean? So the bar's closing at 1, you've had too much, you can now walk out back, buy a flat of beer at 1 a.m. Like, it just seemed like not a good idea at all, but across the province, that off sale, that's all good. And I thought, that's a strange rule. So it already is different with alcohol, so it wouldn't be a surprise if it was different in every province. And I guess it depends which government's in charge in each province at the time.
Yes, that's true. I could see this being an election issue.
Yeah, for sure.
I think could be.
Did we get any?
Do we want to?
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Sure, we can ask some questions here.
We appreciate you, because you never know what you're going to get here, Dean, so who knows?
Oh, here we go. Oh, I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So Tiffany in Calgary asks, are dispensaries legal now or not? Because they're confused. They can walk in right now and...
Yeah. Technically, under the federal law, they're not.
Are the medical ones illegal too now, even still?
Dispensaries are not technically legal.
Okay, interesting.
So there is an opportunity. There's a lot of background, but effectively the courts have struck down multiple federal regimes, and right now there's no mechanism for a dispensary.
Interesting, okay.
Another question, why are thousands of people continuing to be arrested since Trudeau announced the legalization?
Well, that's what we were just talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's not that many. I think that was what's weird about Toronto, is that they were very aggressive, and I just don't, and then a few months later we hear, oh, guess what, we're going to take over. It just doesn't seem right to me.
Right, a little hypocritical
It
perhaps.
does seem like a little bit like that, right? Because those people are all charged criminally. That's very serious. But we'll see what happens.
We have another question here. How will the incoming regulations protect children from access?
Well, it's not the regulations, it's the act, the Cannabis Act, and I would encourage everybody to go have a look at it. It's not that easy reading, but it's something to look at, inform people, make better decisions, and can influence their government, hopefully. It does speak to anybody under 18 is certain criteria, and anybody under 12 a different criteria, so it does kind of outline those things. And it does have a lot about marketing and advertising, and not to be advertising to minors.
Yeah.
Very similar to what liquor is now currently, right? They can't sponsor certain things. So I think the government said they wanted a couple things. One was to keep it away from kids, and I think that's what they've done in that relationship or in the act is not unreasonable.
No, I know, but as we were talking before the show, I was, when I was a kid going to school, you can get it anywhere you possibly wanted. And I don't have a feeling it's gotten any harder. If not, it's gotten easier over the years. That's why I find the whole thing about kids a little overblown. Of course, no one wants kids to be smoking it. We get that completely. But to pretend that it's not happening right now and that this is going to change it, I find ridiculous.
It is. I think that hopefully they take some of the funds that they get and use that in education.
Yeah.
Let people make decisions. But you're right. There's probably kids doing it now.
So,
of course.
And I think
any school in the
I think the worst thing to do would be to pretend that's not the case.
Right. It's not a brand new product. It's been around.
and educate them on the safety of use.
Yeah.
I think, do we have one more, or are we done?
Well, I just have a question
okay,
to
yes.
myself about driving. Do you think that the laws are going to stay the same penalties as drinking and driving laws? Or is it going to just do a whole 360?
Well, my sense of all laws, they should have a reason, and harm reduction should be one of them. And I think that because someone may have some residual of some THC or something in their system, there still should be a connection to, are they able to drive, right? I think there's a connection to, what alcohol you have in your system to make you safe or not safe. The problem I understand from my looking into this is that maybe long-term users have it in their system longer. So it could be a week or so since you've done something which affects your driving and not at all.
Right.
But you could be in a problem. So I don't know what's going to happen. It's very interesting. Hopefully they do it right. They don't just do it to placate somebody, right? A group that says we need to ban this.
Zero tolerance.
Yeah, zero tolerance or something crazy like that, because that's going to cause nothing but problems. Hopefully they find a way to measure if you're less able to drive and then deal with it that way.
Dean, thanks so much for coming in
No
today,
problem.
man.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it completely. Dean Davison, the Davison Law Group. We appreciate a number of clients who are dispensary owners. And as he said, it's a legal limbo, a gray area, to say the least. Coming up next week, we could tell you, Dr. Bryn Hindman is going to be joining us on the show, a naturopath and an MD. And she deals with medical marijuana on a regular basis, dealing with her patients. She's going to join us in studio as well. We should thank our guests for coming in today as well. Dean, of course, Brian O'Day for joining us. Again, you can pick up his book, High. Definitely worth the read. We will get him on the show again. And of course, Dean, thanks very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hopefully see you again.
Anytime you want.
All right.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, we'll see you next
THC.
week. Yep, Thursday, 4:20 Pacific time, episode 4. Until then, have a good week.
Ciao.